Great speaker today. Steve McDonald is going to talk about and review the top agronomic and pest challenges of the year. Very popular subject as we kind of close out 2023 and plan for 2024. I want to introduce myself first and foremost. My name is Eric Snellsire. I'm the Director of Sales for Landscape Supply. These L.E.A.R.N webinars are provided to you on behalf of our company, Landscape Supply, as well as our sister companies, 10 Barge and Walker Supply, and our customers. So these are free and they are recorded and will be available to you guys and gals after this date via recording on our website. And then I will send a direct link to everyone who registered formally with follow-up after this presentation. So thanks again for taking some time today on a busy schedule on a Thursday leading into possibly a rainy weekend, as Steve talked about earlier. I know people are busy, and I just want to thank you guys for one, your patronage to our companies, and also for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here today. A quick checklist, if you don't mind. This is a open dialogue presentation. Steve certainly is going to take us through. We've got an hour on this presentation, and but if you would like to ask a question throughout the course of today's webinar, there's a chat function on the bottom of your screen. Most likely, you can chat or type your question into that chat, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. You can ask it over the line. So please feel free to ask some questions. There'll be some time at the end as well to review Steve's talk and provide some questions then. Following the presentation, I just want to hit on this real quick. This webinar should get approved for 0.1 CEUs through GCSAA. We've had some delays in getting the CEUs for these webinars sent to us, and I think it was more of a oversight on my behalf, but we're handling that and they are going to get approved. But I will send that GCSAA code as well as a video recording link to today's presentation, and Steve's agreed to provide the PDF of the presentation as well. So you guys will have some resources coming to you from me post presentation. Without further ado, I want to introduce Steve. Steve's the owner and chief plot sprayer at Turfgrass Disease Solutions. Steve has his bachelor's degree from Delaware University and got his master's degree from University of Maryland under Dr. Dernoden. He consults professional turfgrass managers on every aspect of turfgrass management. As many of us know on the call, he spends a ton of time visiting golf courses from Virginia all the way up through New England. In addition, his company also conducts over 100 field trials at his locations throughout Pennsylvania that he owns there, and also spends his free time as an adjunct professor at Rutgers and Del Val. So, Steve, you're a busy man. Certainly appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us and providing us some insight and updates on this year's challenges.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Eric, for the invite. Eric, you want to mention these quick slides here real quick, or did you mention that already?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's so this is our L.E.A.R.N webinar series just for you guys who have been attending. These are sponsored by Walker Supply, Landscape Supply, and 10 Barge. So again, thank you to those sponsors. We've got a November webinar coming up. As you can see here, you'll see a lot of marketing campaigns centered on getting more registrations for these ones. We've got November. We've got Todd Eden coming to talk about understanding how water and soils interact for promoting healthy turf. And then in December, we have a crossover presentation that will be for construction and MPs for stormwater management as well in December. So, Steve, take it easy, buddy.
So I want to start off by saying thanks to the team at Landscape Supply. I think Bo first reached out to me about this and Eric followed up. So thanks to the folks at Landscape Supply. Landscape's been nothing but supportive to myself with questions and materials. If I need product, I can easily call them and get some stuff. But also thanks for inviting me to speak today. Most important topic I have today is Go Phillies, right? So it's a Thursday afternoon game. So go Phils. So real quick, I've never been really good at self-promotion, but I have a really fun endeavor the past 2 years. I'm doing weekly agronomic videos, And what I do in these videos is I basically culminate my observation from visiting 15, 20, 25 golf courses every week into a video that subscribers get on Saturday morning. So if you're interested in this, it's been a very valuable tool. I continue to get a lot of feedback from golf course superintendents on this. There's a quick QR code there. Basically, these run weekly from March through the middle of October. And then over the wintertime months, I do special content. Like this year, I have Andy Johnson from the Fried Egg coming on. I have an insurance golf sale specialist coming on to talk about lawsuits and legal aspects of greenkeeping and how to protect your golf course from being sued this coming December. So I have a lot of really good content and a little self-plug there before I get started. So the overview of my topics today, I really feel that 2023 was not an easy year, but not a difficult year for turfgrass managers. And kind of you'll say, well, it wasn't easy, it wasn't hard. What was it? Well, it wasn't either, because we had some tough, quick stretches. We had some kind of slow, sleepy stretches as well. So I'm going to talk about construction, and more construction today. Slow spring, dry spring. I know there's pockets in Western Virginia and Central PA that are still very dry relative to, say, New England, where it's really wet. Most golf courses are still very busy. I'm going to talk about not a lot of annual bluegrass, weevil, and diseases this spring, and then why we're seeing so many ants. Talk about dollar spot pressure on both cool season grasses and Bermuda grass, and then not a new weed, but a weed that's definitely kind of come to the forefront the past year has been silvery thread moss on putting greens. And talk about moss in detail a little bit here today, and then are we seeing more of it? Now, construction has been at the forefront. Basically, it started to ramp up even before COVID, I feel, but we're seeing a lot of push for investments in the golf courses. And many of you will look at this bunker that probably has not been touched since the late 90s and cringe because of how far bunkers have come in golf course landscape. And realize that there are many golf courses. I visit them. I see them that haven't invested a dime into bunkers in 15, 20, and 30 years, even 35-year-old irrigation systems. And one thing that's really interesting as a consultant is to see how, the turf around this bunker, the fairways are in superior shape. And then you have this bunker that basically only half of it can be raked and it doesn't drain properly. So you see, better ability systems going in, not to specifically promote one system or another. There's a lot of really good bunker liner systems going in. Whether it's Capcon, even sod line bunkers are an option for some clubs that don't have the money for these hard liners. But we begin to see that there versus what I just showed you as far as a bunker. It's pretty obvious that these investments are pretty significant. And a lot of golf clubs have really spent a lot of time, energy, and planning for this, as well as budgeting and talking about the pros and cons. And it's pretty obvious that, this bunker is going to drain better, even if the sand does move. It's not contaminated. It's easier to push back up, cheaper to maintain long term. But the initial upfront cost is pretty large for the investment. Also seeing irrigation systems go in, which is awesome to see. Here on the left, they're marking out, in and out heads, and then there's some HPD pipe being installed there on the right. So obviously, irrigation is going to come with higher expectations. Can the golf course be firmer, for example? You'll definitely be more efficient. I'm going to mention a little later here about people management. I probably could have called this talk, agronomic, pest, and people problems of 2023, because people continue to be unpredictable at many of my consulting endeavors. In construction, this is actually very near and dear to my heart. This is actually the third hole at Philadelphia Country Club. For those of you who know me, know that I grew up caddying at Philadelphia Country Club in the 90s. I worked on the grounds crew there from the late 90s. And I actually personally fumigated this fairway with Bazimid in the year 2000. And it's interesting to see 23 years later, they are again, redoing this golf course, expanding fairways, moving bunkers, new bunker liners, brand new greens are being built in the original green cavities that were there from the 20s. So pretty interesting to see, these large projects. Brand new construction. I've consulted on 4 new construction projects the past year. Previous to this, I had one in about 15 years. So really interesting to see, not only just renovation, but brand new construction. And not just golf. There's many clubs that are looking at their holistic property. Well, this is actually a tennis court that I'm consulting for. It's basically going to be built as a USGA spec with a 70% sand, 20% peat, 10% soil mix. and it's going to have a 12-inch root zone on top of gravel and pipe drainage. And I really think about, they're going to sod this to bluegrass. This is actually in New England. But this is one of the first major renovations of tennis courts I've seen in my career. So not just golf course, many clubs are looking at the whole entire property and saying, how do we improve this for our membership and for years to come? So pretty interesting to see. Now, in recent years, I'm seeing a lot of interesting trends with sodding greens, and I would feel more comfortable now. Actually, I do feel more comfortable now about sodding greens than I did, say, 15 years ago because of some success we've seen. But this is actually a club that actually stripped the sod off their greens, laid it out on tarps, and it's all bent grass. And it's about 20-year-old golf course. They put the sod back down because they wanted it to match. The club had bought in some commercially available green sod, and members say, well, that sod doesn't match our old greens, right? So it's interesting to see. This is actually a leveling and expansion project at a club. And here's actually a green being shut out and rebuilt. And we stood in the approach a few weeks ago. And I said to the superintendent, I said, hey, you're going to spend about $100,000 on this project, and that oak tree there is dead. So I'm going to mention trees later, but just to me, I see that and I say, hey, that tree should probably go too. But long story short, we're seeing a lot of construction going on, and the tree battle continues, right? So this is obviously a lightning strike. The tree battle at many golf courses is probably the most political challenge, and many trees were planted 20 or 40 years ago, and Mother Nature is helping with some regard with wind and lightning. But when I continue to see this, I educate people. I say, hey, that tree that you think is an important part of the golf hole could be struck by lightning at any point or blown over, right? So trees are temporary too, and trying to talk about the benefits of tree removal and tree management and golf course care as an important balancing act. One thing I am seeing is I'm seeing clubs that did take out 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 trees the past 10 years. They're actually now going back and replanting. And so it's an important thing to think about is not only talk about removal, but having a management plan and replanting trees is really something to think about. Now into the weather and its impact for golf course care and turf management this year. Many golf courses I consulted for last winter were extremely busy. I was hearing numbers like 2,000 rounds in February and 2,500 rounds and very busy golf play when normally it's maybe 300. I think one of the things that happened is we have had some milder winters throughout the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, even in the central part of the U.S., and we've had very little snow coverage, right? So there's expectation that, hey, we're going to play golf. I had more emails and phone calls last winter from members, general managers saying, Steve, XYZ, our superintendent doesn't roll the greens for us in February. And I say, well, what's the budget to maintain greens in February? And they say, what do you mean? I'm like, well, their focus right now is to prepare the golf course for spring and for opening day and work on tree work and work on the mowers. And maybe they should be actually working on the engine of the roller, not rolling greens in February, right? So it's just really interesting to kind of balance these expectations for some of us in the Northeast and mid-Atlantic that really aren't accustomed to doing thousands of rounds in the wintertime. So, and then March and April were actually cool and really kind of showed us that, hey, we are going to have some sort of a winter, but it's not going to be in our typical wintertime calendar. And the biggest challenge I think we faced agronomically this past calendar year was slow growth and slow aerification recovery. I would say that more than 80% of the golf courses I consulted for this year prior to June 1st reported slower than normal aerification recovery from any aerification that occurred between Halloween and Mother's Day of 2023. So think about that window. Golf courses are beginning to aerify greens now, say in the Northeast. And it was so cool. It got really cold around the first of the year last year in late December. And then we had this mild, kind of slow, funky January, February, and then March and April were very cold. So any holes were very slow to heal. And I have there not saying they impact the ball roll, but visually to a golfer, it was very eye-opening to say, why are the holes still here in the May and early June? 2 weeks ago, I visited a club and the superintendent said to me, he said, you would have thought I poisoned the dog, right? People are so frustrated. They don't want me to aerify this fall. And I said to him, I was like, oh, that's terrible. But he said, they're still holding the fact that aerification recovery was so slow this spring against me, Steve. And it was a very interesting conversation to talk about. Aerification has obvious benefits. It's still the most important thing that we do to the greens to ensure long-term success and not failure. But this recovery this spring has many clubs rethinking their aerification. I'm seeing some clubs going to tarp some greens this winter that have never done it, moving aerification up into the fall. maybe doing some extra fertilization in the fall, or doing less aggressive and kind of rolling the dice, right? So less aggressive could lead to more thatch accumulation, maybe softer greens when they're wet. And other things could happen. So it's unpredictable. If we had a model, I want to leave you with this about aerification. If we had a model that you could actually plug all this stuff into, I wouldn't be in business, right? Because aerification, recovery, and turf management is more of an art than we can actually predict, right? It's not like a financial planner says, okay, well, how old are you? How much money do you have? What are your assets? And then they can give you a percentage to retire at these dates. It's not that simple as far as aerification recovery goes. And many people have that idea. So really also the spring moisture management was very critical. And then we had some spring diseases like Batia and large patch in Georgia, which were very slow to grow out. Now, I want to mention this too. This is a very interesting map. I just pulled this off of the U.S. Drought Monitor website this morning. Kind of goes to show that in the Western Panhandle and Western Virginia, there's definitely some droughty areas there, and even in Western Pennsylvania. But most of the, New Jersey, Delaware, Eastern Pennsylvania, New York, all those states in New England they're not droughty. But there is some pockets. And I'm very aware of these pockets that are very dry. It had a very dry year. So I'm going to mention some of the weather patterns we had, but I realize that there are some out there that really they started out dry in the spring and it's been dry relatively up until this fall, right? So I saw a lot of this in early June. This is dormant bentgrass that was under drought stress. And I feel like I saw more turf managers and crew members hand watering this spring with hoodies and beanies on, winter coats. It was really dry and really cool. And the downsides of that is that bentgrass in particular will not break full dormancy. And bentgrasses require some humidity and some moisture to really break full dormancy. The other thing I want to point out in this photo here is see the moss. And I'm going to talk about moss at the end of my presentation today when I talk about weeds and weed observations from 2023. But definitely look at that. Moss is pretty green, and that bentgrass probably hasn't grown since October and November. And this is early June. You can see how droughty it was. So moss definitely gained a foothold in a lot of bentgrass greens this past year. Here's some of those slow aerification holes. And it's important to really point out and think about this. Ridges and areas that tend to dry out quicker are usually the slowest to heal from aerification. So this year, most of those holes, here's a dry eject process here in a little oblong and that ridge from the slope and the machine. But really late May, early June is when we began to see it. And I've said this before. Actually, I wrote an article for Golf Course Management magazine about 10 years ago. And the point I made is in the spring, there are times when aerification recovery can be so slow that it doesn't matter if you core in February, March 15th, April 1st, April 15th, May 1st, that the greens really won't get fully 100% healed into the same day in May. So it's a balancing act there between trying to get them to fill in with fertilization. I'm seeing a trend with people pulling smaller cores and more of them. Say they double aerify a green. That's because the heal time is much shorter in a smaller hole versus say a half-inch or a 5/8 inch core. Surface area is still the same. So I'm seeing some trends people changing up aerification. I always tend to be more conservative and say, the key to having good greens is oxygen and dilution, right? So we know that the benefits in aerification is very important. Because the growth rate of bentgrass was so slow, even Poanua, green speeds were not an issue. It was funny. I was hearing golfers say, hey, Steve, why can't our superintendent do this all the time, right? And I said, it's the weather. And people don't want to hear that. But, it was a very eye-opening experience through May that it was dry and cool. And the water need, there was days in May this year, you could literally throw as much water as you really wanted to. It was going to evaporate from wind, intense sun, and just being dry and cool. So one thing I did advise a lot this spring was watch your traffic from play as well as the rollers, because the grass growth rate was so slow. The other big observation agronomically this spring was stemmy bentgrass. And I think anybody growing older bentgrass greens, say 15 years or older, probably saw some of this in their greens, even some fairways, if you have bentgrass fairways this past spring. And it was really interesting because if you got down and look at these bentgrass plants, they had this almost seed stalk. And bentgrass does try to go to seed. If you look at bentgrass, say in an unmowed and rough, say in a high grass area, we have some creeping bentgrass, it will actually produce a seed usually in June. Also, you see a lot of bentgrass, say in creek banks or in waterways where bentgrass does like it wet, right? So it thrives in saturated soils along wetlands and other areas. So it does go to seed. I believe a lot of this stemmy bentgrass was directly related to the cool, dry weather, almost like a Pacific Northwest spring where they actually get bentgrass to produce a lot of seeds. So these are basically seed stalks, in my opinion. And what happens is various biotypes produce more than others. So you have these circular patches sometimes in bentgrass greens, but I've never seen it this prominent this spring. And people thought maybe it was yellow tuft. It could be related to yellow tuft, although I didn't see these greens actually have yellow tuft infections in them. This is basically stemmy bentgrass. And interesting to note that many of the younger greens that are less than 5 years old, I'm not going to pick any cultivars that are younger, but we definitely saw the younger greens have less of the stemmy appearance this past spring. And also want to point out that, we could vertical mow and brush and do anything we want as far as a texture improvement to greens this spring. It was really just a slow time. And that bentgrass was so lignified and hardened off that I saw many times where, vertical mowers, even hand brushing on some of these areas really did not alleviate this really coarse bentgrass. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the challenges I saw this past year with Bermuda grass and even some zoysia grass. And this here is a Bermuda grass fairway. You can see a Bermuda grass rough. There's entire property is Bermuda with bentgrass greens. And it was pretty interesting to look at areas where there's more compaction, low mowing, and water was sitting where the slowest areas to green up. And some of this was actually winter killed, right? So we had areas that would traffic it over the wintertime. Were definitely more impacted by wintertime damage. And there was some talk about maybe this damage happened back in December of 2022. Remember around the holidays last year, we had some really cold, windy weather. And I feel like maybe some of this stuff could be set up by that. But also the fact that, we had such a slow transition in the spring to summer also probably left this Bermuda grass in dormancy much longer. And then in areas where it was compacted or water would sit during rainfall, or areas that had a lot of intense pinch point traffic. Here's where you can see a fairway mower turning in excess around this bunker. And then areas where the mowers are mowing the flats and not turning, there was no damage and no delay in green up. So also lower mowing heights were impacted too. So some of my warm season grass concerns for spring of 2023, both zoysia and Bermuda were affected. The zoysia grass I saw this spring was more affected by drought. You could see serpentine type patterns in there that were clearly localized dry spots from last fall. Remember, last fall it was an incredibly dry fall, which is interesting. We're pretty wet for most of the Northeast right now. I was talking with the superintendent this morning, and he was expressing some frustration about how wet it was going into one of their biggest tournaments this weekend. And he's, getting questions about, did you roll the greens today? And I cut and rolled the greens, but they're just soft, right? So interesting contrast between last fall and this year. Now, clear-cut lines between damage and Bermuda grass was trafficked leading into winter and during the winter months. For example, driving range floors where the ball pickers are picking all winter. I want to mention quickly that the autonomous or robotic mowers are very useful for driving range floors. I probably visited 20, 25 golf courses using them on their driving ranges. Now, I was concerned about, balls hitting them and issues with that, but I haven't heard of a single concern, as well as the compaction from those robotic mowers is a lot less than saying having, those big mowers out there. So it could be something to think about. Compacted and poorly drained sites are definitely a concern. Some of it was dry. Now, there's no ideal, it's a typo there, I got to fix, ideal fairway grass species for much of the mid-Atlantic. Cooler autumn, winter, and springs will lead to slower Bermuda grass, right? So and then we have bent grass. So hot and wet summers will lead to soft and wilty bent grass. So definitely some concerns there for these species selections. When I get questions like, what's our best grass species for fairways? The easiest answer for most of the mid-Atlantic is there's not one ideal grass. I want to show a quick video here. This is actually from FedEx St. Jude Championship, which was at TPC Southwind in Memphis. Now, we don't give professional golfers, I don't think, enough credit, but listen to what John Rahm says to Rory McIlroy here.
Hey, Steve, I don't think we can hear it.
Can you see the video?
We can see it.
Okay, so I'll talk you through this then. Thanks, Eric. So essentially, this is the zoysia grass fairway in Memphis, Tennessee, with Bermuda grass rough. And what John Rahm is explaining to Roy McIlroy, he asked him over to look at his ball because this is playing lift, clean, and place. Now, I don't believe that many amateur golfers realize how many and percentage of rounds on tour are lift, clean, and place. Now, the reason why this is important is John Rahm does not want to touch his ball if it is not in his own fairway. So he calls Roy McIlroy over to make sure it is. And he's talking about the Bermuda and the Georgia, and he mentions it right there. And so he is actually identifying the fairway as Georgia grass, but there's Bermuda in the fairway that's creeped in. And he does a very good job explaining it to Rory that these differences in the grass species, right? And reason why I wanted to show this video to you is that, you know, this is a very interesting topic that one, when we get wet, these tour pros are one, picking their ball up, cleaning it and giving themselves the lie they want. Now, it's rare to see this on TV. I honestly watch a lot of professional golf in my free time on weekends. And, you know, I really rarely ever see that actually occur. This is one of the rare scenarios. So it's interesting to see this, but also that the pros are also talking about grass species. And, you know, this is what the downside of bentgrass is in much of the Mid-Atlantic is right here is bentgrass and ryegrass fairways that have a lot of cart traffic on them, especially when the roots are up in the top inch and they wilt prematurely. We call this wet wilt sometimes, where there's plenty of moisture, but the fairways are wilting. And I think I've been talking more and more about is that, you know, you have got traffic on bentgrass or ryegrass fairways in the heat of the summer. Those fairways will probably require 40 to 60% more water to keep up with the wilt symptoms, right? So here's some cart tracks showing up on a warm, sunny day. You see it's shaded in the morning here, and there's the broken sunlight there to the right. But this is what I mentioned about there's no perfect grass species. This is starting to come to fruition at a lot of places as we see people look at water use, pesticide use. Is our grass species the ideal grass? But there's really no ideal species. You know, we have these risks with Bermuda grass and even Georgia that could be a slow spring or a dry transition, or do you have issues in July and August with these grasses? So something I wanted to mention there in a little bit of detail. Very, very dry. This is a picture I have from the third week of May. You see the grass is a bent poa green. This particular turf had embark on it. This golf course still uses embark. So not only was the turf purple and pink and regulated from the embark, the greens were extremely dry. And I'll never forget, I was this golf course and a woman member said, "Steve, are our greens alive?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am. They're just fine. They're just dormant." And they're what? They're slow growing is the way I put it. Very slow growing. So sure enough, once the things warmed up in late May and June, the greens were not an issue at all. Came back great. So also I mentioned tee boxes, and I mentioned this already, is a Georgia grass tee box. And I call these the classic batter's boxes, where the tee is not large enough for average people to kind of visualize spreading the traffic out. And I saw quite a bit of this on forward tees and undersized tees. Likely here, I would advise, you know, that you split the tee markers, maybe narrow them, even 4 paces wide, just to try to spread that traffic out. Here's another example of that where I would not put the tee marker here. I would try to move it to the side, but really think about traffic management. I think we've had to think about traffic management for the past 3 or 4 years a little differently most golf courses and spread that traffic out. You know, agronomically, we all know how to grow grass, but if you have 60 golfers a day in the same spot, that's a big challenge, right? So really thinking about, you know, spreading this traffic out. Also, I want to mention agronomic and golf course etiquette stuff. And I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. Maybe I'll say 1 or 2 things to you that you can maybe use to educate your membership. But ball marks not repaired or improperly repaired is a big one. I get asked when I play golf with people all the time, "Steve, how do you properly repair a ball mark?" So okay, so here I am as a consultant, maybe playing golf with some members or playing personally, and people come to me and they say, "Steve, how do I repair a ball mark? You're a turf guy, right?" And I think to myself, I'm like, man, you know, I'm in my 40s, right? These people I'm playing with are in their 40s or 50s or 60s. They don't know how to repair a ball mark, right? So maybe we're not doing a good enough job. We think we are. But I explain to people as a piece of sod. So I say, hey, if you went to your local box store, like Home Depot or Lowe's, and you picked up a couple pieces of sod for your front lawn, would you lay the corners up of the sod, or would you pull all that together, right? Just pull the sod together. And they say, oh, that makes a lot of sense, right? So that's how I explain like ball marks. Like, and if you have a dead piece of sod, would you leave it in the lawn? No, you throw it in the trash, right? Or put it in a compost pile. So if you have a dead piece that's detached, pull it off, pull that sod together like a piece of sod, right? It's a ball mark. So also intact divots. This one frustrates me a lot. I play with people and riding in carts, and I'll hit a divot and they get out of the cart and they put the bottle. I'm like, no, 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 no. Like this divot's perfectly fine, right? So putting intact divots back, not replaced. Many caddies and golfers feel like they don't need to do that, especially with bent grass. It's a really important one. The other thing to think about is your blowing habits in the golf course when you're blowing clippings from fairways. Are you blowing a lot of these divots out, right? And so I think many times we see more divots in bent grass and ryegrass fairways because the blowers remove those divots, even if golfers replace them. So try and talk to maybe some of your staff if they have a lot of divots that they're blowing out of the fairways. It could be impacting divot recovery long term. Now bunker play, we're all over the board, right? You could stay on the first tee. You could say to every golfer that plays your golf course today, you could say, hey, please rake your bunkers, right? By the time they get to the 6th or 7th hole, they've forgotten that we'll walk right out of the bunkers, or they're so frustrated that they hit the golf ball in the bunker that they just don't rake it, right? So the other big pet peeve I have is walking across the greens with sand on your shoes. I'll show you a picture of that. Trash. I have a great story about trash on the golf course, but when I play golf, I pick up trash. I pick up my tees, even if broken, put them in the trash, and foot draggers. And then carts in locations they should not be. And I think some of the new GPS carts have helped a lot, but some courses people are very resistant. I've heard more recently some of these new battery lightweight carts are not as injurious. So I asked somebody, I was like, that sounds great, but where's the data, right? Where's the data on this? Because I know you can create premature wilt walking across bent grass that's under drought stress, right? So even a cart with a human being or 2 human beings inside there probably is not going to be that much lighter, right? So here's unrepaired ball marks or just bad ball mark repair, where people are basically prying these up. I mentioned this before, but here's a golfer. So one of the ones I love is a golfer walking across the green with sand in their shoes from the bunker. They almost got to the flag before the sand all fell off. But really that's going to be quite injurious. Say on a 95-degree day, that sand could heat up, create premature wilt and abrasion on greens. So just, cleaning shoes off before you enter a green can be a big one. Foot traffic on tee boxes, even foot dragging there can be a big one. I feel like foot dragging's gotten better with some of our newer spikes versus some of the spikes, say 10, 12 years ago. But still an issue for foot dragging. I'll never forget, I was actually involved in the Greens Committee meeting, and the chairman walked in with a 1-gallon Ziploc baggie full of trash. Had teas, cigar butts, cigarette butts, trash, debris, and things from the golf course. And he threw it on the table and he said to the committee, he says, who put this trash on the golf course? Because I know it's not the staff. And why should the staff be picking it up? Right. And that was a pretty strong Greens Committee chairman at a club. And so just an eye-opening thing. And I encourage most golfers, and if you can communicate this even to your staff, just if you see stuff, pick it up. Now, back to agronomics. Another big challenge we saw was black layer in greens. And here on the foot on the left, this is actually a sand channel drain there, right? And the question comes up, why am I seeing black layer in drains? You see how severe some of this black layer can be. This is a profile here where basically it's black throughout the entire one. And questions will be, Steve, why am I seeing black layer this year, right? And I have a feeling that it was so dry this spring that we had to apply a lot of water to golf courses, probably more so than you did. And the saturation early in this year could create or predispose a turf to more black layer. And then in locations where we had to irrigate more, you have pockets of areas that are maybe an approach or a front of a green that's getting more irrigation coverage. And naturally, it's going to be wetter, right? So always, if you suspect black layer, sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you can actually just smell a little bit of sulfur in there. Black layer is a physical soil issue that I have not seen remedy with chemicals, right? People have sprayed hydrogen peroxide, all types of stuff, and it's a physical issue. So essentially, it's water that's in the profile. It's not moving down uniformly, right? So you have either pockets where it's staying wet or dry in a profile. And sulfide gases build up in that soil, and they create like a rotten egg smell. This impacts the ability to grow roots, even a light odor. And one thing to think about is many times it shows up for 2 reasons. Either the mix is really shallow in spots, or there's irrigation heads out of adjustment. So if you have black layer or had some black layer issues this year, definitely look at the depth of the mix. You can use rebar, tink, and check the depth, right? Maybe it's not enough. There may be a situation where you want to install more drainage in that area of a putting green, or also check your irrigation heads, especially in a dry year. Even if you're running a lot of heads, could have some irrigation hitting those areas repeatedly or overlapping. So 2 big things there. I did see a lot of black layer early this year when we were irrigating quite a bit through, say, middle of June, for example. So some black layer management, try to maintain it dry, check irrigation heads, long-term drill and fill or soil modification down deep. This takes time. Drainage, I am seeing people install more drainage into sand-based cavities. And this is something that I never suspected to be occurring. Right? It was always, hey, if you have push-up greens that don't drain well, install drainage. It was never, hey, if I have a USGA or a California green that's not draining well, install more drainage on, say, 5-foot centers, right? We never really heard that until more recently. So realize that many modern day greens are definitely being built out of variable depth, where the more mix is used in low areas where the water collects. This helps to reduce black layer for sure. Another funny topic is divot recovery, right? So golfers want to come out and take a ton of divots and then wonder why the tees are full of divots. But I am seeing more clubs plugging divots out. So bentgrass, and they have a large divot nursery. As person goes around and moves tee markers, they stick about 25 to 30 plugs in per day. So you may consider this to be excessive, but many of these clubs, expectations are extremely high. I'm going to mention some golfer expectations here towards the end, but realize that I think every industry we're in now, whether it's a hotel, food and beverage, golf course, or service industry, is at an all-time high for expectations. And I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing, but there's people going doing pretty excessive things like plugging ball marks out of greens and divots out of fairways and tee boxes just to keep everything as good as possible. Now into the pest for 2023. Annual bluegrass weevils, what is going on, right? And if I knew exactly what was going on, I would probably be laying on a beach with a Corona right now, not slaving over, these slides today and making sure they're as good as possible for you guys. But I think it's weather related. I think last year we had a really dry, late in the year. It was really impactful for bluegrass weevil populations, and it was so dry in most locales this spring that we saw some egg lay, but we didn't see a huge flush of damage around Memorial Day like we normally do in the Mid-Atlantic and points north. Also, we have some really good insecticides, right? So I don't want to point this out as solely insecticides for one reason, right? I do a lot of consulting in New York, and I know for a fact these superintendents are not using Soprato and Tetrina because they're not labeled in New York. Well, guess what? We're not seeing a lot of weevils in New York either. So it's pretty interesting. I think a lot of superintendents have a false sense of security in Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware that their weevil program never have to worry about again. We're just going to use these materials, right? Well, it could also be this: the pressure is extremely low, right? So we did see some annual bluegrass weevil larvae in late May, but they were isolated, right? I went out and say here I did see some in middle of May, but that stopped very quickly, right? So not a big issue as far as this year. I would say ants were probably more of an issue this year. And I think ants really got established very strong in our dry weather in the spring. Ants tend to thrive in drier, sandier soils. So tee boxes, edges of greens are more impacted. And really it is interesting because I felt like insecticide pressure was put on them, and we were seeing them recover within 2-3 weeks in most scenarios. So I saw some people trying some really aggressive things for ants, and they helped a little bit, but nothing is foolproof for these turf grass ants. They come out and they mound, they dull the mowers, and a real challenge as far as that regard. Now, I definitely saw more black cutworms this year than I had. So remember, black cutworms are really an old school pest that we hadn't really thought much about, but as we've decreased our number of insecticide apps targeting weevils, we're not seeing the same levels of black cutworm control as we once did. Now, cutworms are easy to control. Many of you know there's plenty of options for them, but they're definitely, if you begin to back off and use some of our newer chemistries that have less residual for cutworms, you could see more. So you see some pretty severe cutworm outbreaks. There's a bentgrass tea. This was actually in late summer, and the black cutworms came into the tee boxes and basically chewed the aerification holes from last year back open. So definitely can do some damage. I honestly hadn't seen severe black cutworm damage like this until the past year or so. So as we're seeing a shift, say for example, some of our newer chemistries are weaker on black cutworms and fall armyworms and even chinch bugs. I'll mention chinch, I get the neonicotinoids here soon. But we're seeing that. So definitely, for design an insecticide program, don't forget about some of these ones. They're easy to kill and easy to control, but you don't want to run out there and need to make a rescue application if you don't have to. Now, into diseases for 2023, and as a pathologist, I don't know, what's flower spot, fairy ring, probably the two biggest ones, but nothing crazy, nothing wacky. Pretty easy. Algae was an issue in spots that were getting some rainfall late summer, but from a top disease standpoint, I would say Watia and Poa greens was probably pretty problematic. It was slow to grow out in the spring, then fairy ring, dollar spot, and then spring dead spot. Here's some Watia patch on Poa bent mix. You can see around the edges. Watia is a really strange fungus. It likes it cool and dry. Many times you'll see Watia, say, on the ridges that dry out first, or say you have Poa greens and you have, say, 15 push-up greens and 3 or 4 sand-based greens. The sand-based greens will typically have the worst Watia patch on them in the spring, or the common name of this disease is brown ring patch. And from an identification standpoint, what there on the left is actually a really good one. You can see where you have those crescents, where you have the disease kind of goes like this. And that differs a lot from, say, cool season brown patch, which bentgrass and Poa greens can get to, where you have more of a circular type pattern there. Now, fairy ring also, once again, was much more severe this year because of the dry spring. When you have prolonged periods of hydrophobic soils, that fungus is going to be very competitive. You also got to wonder if, when you have drier springs too, if, say you go 5 or 6 weeks without any rainfall, are those fungicides, whether you're going to go out with a SDHI, like, Valista or Posterity, or any of those materials, ProStar, that have good fairy ring activity, or a DMI, right? If you're going to go with DMI or a Strobe, if they don't get watered in enough, that could also, create issues with fairy ring. Or you say you hadn't been treating for fairy ring and you saw more fairy ring this year, that actually makes you want to think about treating. Was that predisposed because of the dry spring, when soil temps are slowly coming up and that fungal activity is slowly increasing, and they colonize a lot of soil. And with that mycelial mat, if you cut into there, you see that fawn color, that light brown color, or the white mycelium. You can see it colonized a ton of soil and was very active this May. Late May, June, and July. Now, spring dead spot, I feel like we're seeing less and less of this disease. I'm not sure if that's because courses are spending some money and actually spraying some high dollar fungicides on them, or we're aerifying better, but I'm definitely seeing less and less spring dead spot. I feel like, and there's some really good options. I'm not going to belabor you. Actually, Eric said that Brian and Nardi talked in one of your recent podcasts about some spring dead spot and some root diseases on Bermuda grasses, but we have some really phenomenal fungicides. One that are not in the DMI class. There's some good DMIs, but the newer DMIs don't regulate the Bermuda grass. And then we have also a whole another group of SDHI fungicides that are very strong on spring dead spot. So it's the last week of October here next week. So most of you probably already have your spring dead spot applications out. I'm actually going to spray my final application in my trials in Maryland tomorrow. I have a great site for spring dead spot. But really just not seeing a lot of this. We definitely saw some funky spring dead spot, a few courses, but it seemed like it ran a little bit where it moved. But overall, I would say spring dead spot pressure is lower than normal. The one that definitely takes the cake is dollar spot. We saw more dollar spot this year on Bermuda grass and bentgrass and cool season rough. But there was a lot of skips too. I would challenge many people to say, are you seeing skips, or are you seeing actually true outbreaks or epidemics of dollar spot? There's actually a V. You see these patterns. The other thing I see a lot is people trying to get too narrow with GPS sprays, right? So you see these strips of maybe 50% coverage of the fungicide, not 100% coverage. And here's a really eye-opening one. It's on a golf course, mowing fairways 3 days a week and dragging them on days. And all the dollar spot was more severe in the areas where the actual hose would bounce. You can almost see that. See that right there, see where they're making a clear swipe. There's no dollar spot. And that goes to show a few things. One, how much dew displacement does decrease dollar spot, as well as that it's really effective at reducing dollar spot, and then moisture is critical. So I had another scenario, a 27-hole golf course, and superintendent was asking about dollar spot. So let's go out and look at it. So we're riding 27 holes, about 400-acre property, big property. And I'm dawned on me, like, it's like 10 minutes from the shop. So I said to him, I was like, hey, Tom, are these fairways you're taking me out to mowed the last every time the fairways are cut? And he goes, well, why? Why do you ask that? I said, well, a couple of years ago, I had a superintendent had some very severe dollar spot on the 16th, 17th, and 18th greens. And I said to him, I was like, hey, these greens mowed last every day. And he said, yeah, why? It's obvious the dew's sitting there for a little longer every day. We might not think about it like that, but it actually increases dollar spot pressure. So if you have fairways or areas that you have extreme dollar spot pressure, they think about roughs. We see a lot of dollar spot and roughs. Well, roughs are typically a lot of courses, a second job mode in the afternoon. So the dew sits there all morning, right? And begin to think about that pressure and what that does to dollar spot pressure can be critical. That superintendent midsummer switched up from mowing fairways, mowing 1 through 27, for example, went 27. One mower started at 27 as a play, and he texted me about a month later and said the dollar spot's gone. No change in fungicide, no real change in weather, but dollar spot was definitely less. So we saw some really crazy dollar spot and golf course roughs. I want to point this out that there are many courses spraying more and more rough. There on the far right, you have untreated rough. This golf course is making one pass around all their fairways. And really eye-opening to see what one monthly spray, each month, can really do to improving the quality of golf course roughs. Pretty eye-opening. Probably really well money spent. There's some cost-effective fungicides out there to do this with. It doesn't take, every 21 to 35 days, you'll see a huge benefit from increasing density. The other thing you got to wonder too, if crabgrass and poa annua and some of these weeds tend to fill in any thin spots in rough, is what disease control can do for other aspects of your pest management. Can you maybe see less crabgrass, for example, or less goosegrass, right? So thinking about that holistically can be a pretty eye-opening thing. You begin to think about it agronomically. Now, in our weed control observations, and I'll try to get out of here next 10 minutes or so. I don't want to go over my time, but not a lot to discuss with weed control. Once again, not a terrible year for goosegrass or sedges. I think we once again have better herbicides. One thing I will mention besides moss is we saw a lot of summer annual breakthrough late in the summer. So say foxtail and high grass areas, crabgrass and goosegrass, but it didn't come on until late. I think a lot of that is we finally had some rainfall. Or was a dry spring not allowing your pre-emergent herbicides to get watered in properly, especially in areas where you have no irrigation or little irrigation. So I want to think about moss here for a minute. Moss breaks all the rules, right? Look at this photo here. It's a pretty heavy moss outbreak, right? You see it's green, silvery in nature, and the common name here is silvery thread moss. Look at the cleanup pass. Look how much less moss is in that cleanup pass. So moss is a problem in high sand content soils or ridges and slopes that are prone to being a little dry, or mowing heights are a little less because the bed knife pitch is a little different. I've seen this over the years that you see substantially less moss in the cleanup passes. And that tells me it's probably mechanical, meaning that, cleanup pass is mowed in either counterclockwise or clockwise, and the areas in the green are mowed at different angles, right? So you can see maybe a different pitch, and 1 or 2 scalping events could lead to some moss filling. So think about the biology of moss too, right? Moss is a primitive plant, right? There's a very severe moss infestation. This is a tough one. This is, as a consultant, do you advise, sodding that out only for it to maybe come back if they have this? That's a little mound there. It's a tough one. So my advice here is try some Quicksilver, try some plugging. I would not plug this wholesale. I'd probably plug some of this into the cleanup pass, and chances are if you plug it into the cleanup pass, some of that will decrease. But very severe moss this year. And I think the moss is for a few reasons. I'll mention them. One, moss is a very primitive plant, right? It's probably been on this earth since the dinosaurs have been here. If you look at moss in the woods, if you go for a walk, say in December, you look at moss and lichens that are on rocks and in trees, they're green year round. And we have prolonged periods of drought last fall, mild winter, and then a really slow, cool spring. Moss is definitely going to get a competitive edge on a lot of cool season grasses and putting green. So it thrives in sand, it thrives in slopes. So for control, there's no great option for control. Remember, this is a primitive plant. It's very complex, spreads by many mechanisms. Quicksilver, which is carfentrazone, is an option for silvery thread moss control and putting greens. Remember, carfentrazone is a really weak contact herbicide. So carfentrazone has no soil residue, burns tissue back. So it takes repeat application. That's what I'm getting at by saying it's weak. It's not terribly weak. It's best to use for moss with repeat applications. Now, people ask me all the time about fungicides like Daconil and Mancozeb. I have trialed those materials. I've trialed them in tank mixes, and I do see some benefit of those for moss. Realize they're not labeled for moss control. I believe the mechanism here is it's probably desiccating some of the moss, just like it does on black algae, right? So it could help to break it up and desiccate. Realize these are fungicides primarily. If you're seeing some moss suppression from them, that's secondary to quicksilver. And there are some other products in the market. I've seen Dawn soap. I've seen people try kitty litter and then trying to get the moisture out of the moss of kitty litter and then sweeping it and blowing it off. I've seen all types of stuff, and they're just more inconsistent. So the easiest way I have is watch your mechanics, spoon feed some quicksilver out there over time, and then be wise with your scalping when possible. I did see some breakthrough this year, and right now, actually, agronomically being in late October is a really good time for you to assess your annual grassy weed control. And a lot of obvious skips, in midsummer when you see that the crabgrass is lime green and the grass there around there, right? So definitely think about assessing these right now. Obviously, it's too late for some post applications, but knowing what your post applications are. Quickly mention Kalinga. We're definitely getting better herbicides in the market. The new L.E.A.R.N material, which is a sprayable formulation of the product called Vexus, very, very safe. I've trialed this material for 5 years now, and 4 or 5 years, it's been great. And from a research standpoint, as well as people feel more comfortable using Solero and Pro Sedge in cool season and bentgrass in particular. In warm season grasses, you have other options as well.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Not to interrupt, but on that subject, that last slide, if you don't mind going back, with regards, are you seeing, what are you seeing in terms of recommending in terms of application timing? Because I've seen some Solero applications working really well, like in May, early June, when it's just getting started. And I've seen it get out of control where guys are going in there with blanket applications, but have to do 2 or 3 applications later on.
So the best sulfonylurea timing for sedges is usually before summer solstice. So meaning you can get significantly better sedge control if you start your herbicides before the middle of June. We actually had a trial with experimental herbicide a couple of years ago, and the company wanted us to do 3 or 4 different sites. So they said, hey, can you do this in various sites? I didn't have the sites to do so. So I suggested to them, I said, hey, why don't we start one trial in May, one trial in June, one trial in July, and one trial in August at the same site. So same herbicide rates, all it was is different timings. And it was eye-opening in the same exact golf course location. The treatments that went out in May and June provided 95, 99% control. The treatments that went out in July and August, 65 to 70% control. Exact same rates. All the difference was the timing. So many times, like this photo we have here, where you see these very diffused patches of Kalinga, superintendent maybe says, I'll get that later. They forget about it, or they just get busy, or the weather doesn't allow them to spray it. And all of a sudden it becomes those dense mats. Once it's very dense, it's extremely difficult to control. So I would definitely, if you are going to go after, and that could be for all these herbicides, whether that's Solero, whether that's Pro Sedge or Sedgehammer, or even L.E.A.R.N. We have some data with L.E.A.R.N. shows some of our most effective applications are in actually late April and May versus August and September. So I would definitely advise trying to get on these sedges. And even in agricultural, we had another company developing a sedge product. A lot of sedge herbicides get looked at in turf, but not a lot come to the marketplace. And the agricultural person, he said, Steve, we have to spray all our sedge up by July 1st, he said to me, and the crop that he was working with. So yeah, Eric, you're definitely onto something there. I didn't put that detail in here, but definitely earlier is better. Even if you have minor sedge pressure, whether that's Kalinga or yellow nut sedge, I would say before the middle of June is pretty critical. So good point. All right, I was going to mention fescue. I'm going to get through this. If anybody has any questions on fine fescues, I'm happy to take an email or a text or a phone call. I wanted to mention this real quick and kind of give you some I don't know, novelty things. But other observations from 2023, right? Traffic management, rope and stake is a lot of time, and it's really a funny topic when you talk to golfers. Or, I mean, you can basically have a director of traffic control at a golf course, right? You can have a full-time job directed towards like even foot traffic, right? Last June, I went and spent a week in Scotland. It was amazing because, it gets light at 4 o'clock in the morning there, and it's light till 10:30 at night during June and July. And you're like, holy moly, these golf courses could do like 300 rounds a day if they wanted to. Well, I think they probably could, but the traffic would be crazy. I mean, just think about the goat trails. It's all walking, but still, like even the pinch points around mounds and greens complexes and tees. But track mats are definitely something that's not a new topic. It's kind of more marketing and more newer stuff here, but they're working well. If you look there where the track mats stop in the foreground, you can see that the golf carts are wearing this out. And people will say, Steve, why are our cart path edges not great? I'm like, well, if you drove 90 carts over Thursday, Friday over that area too, it'd be dead as well, right? So just talking about how much traffic, these areas are receiving. Also mentioned the neonicotinoid ban, which goes into effect in New Jersey. And those of you in maybe Virginia, North Carolina, maybe out west are thinking to yourselves, what are you talking about, Steve? Well, yes, New Jersey banned all neonicotinoid use for all non-agricultural use. So homeowners, dogs, pets. It details this in detail. The letter that came out, this letter was sent to every state pesticide certification license holder. Basically, Governor Murphy outlawed the use as in January. It went into effect here in October 31st. Next week it goes into effect. So that's Triple Crown, Meridian, Merit, right? All these materials are banned in New Jersey. I don't want to sound political, but I probably have 12 or 13% of my clients that have bees on the property, right? This is a very important talking point when people bring this up. And I've been involved with pesticide, for forever. I've never seen a bee kill on a golf course. Maybe if you have, email me and tell me you have, or you see a widespread bee kill. But there's golf courses out there that do make insecticide applications within relatively close proximity to beehives and don't see large bee kills due to the insecticide. So I'm very challenging to the fact that I really think golf courses are a very unique landscape. I feel like we're lumped into ornamentals too broadly when we look at pesticide labeling. I hate to say that, but I think there's going to be some pressure put on some other states here soon. I know Maryland, New York, and other states have a lot of pressure on them. So it'd be interesting to see, just to kind of bring us to your attention for those of you guys in Virginia, other states. And one of my concerns is like chinch bugs. We have, Acelyprin, Tetrino, and Ferrins, which are all very benign materials. But they don't control some chinch bugs, right? So they're weak. So one of the concerns is that we ban materials and we have to go back and use pyrethroids or organophosphates, right? So Dilox and 7 are probably some of your best options for chinch bugs if you lose the neonicotinoid class, right? So just beginning to think about this holistically. I'm trying to talk to people about this bee issue a lot. I've talked to some superintendents that have bees and say, Steve, we spray what we need to spray for our turf, and we haven't had any issues with bees. My last topic here is, even in 2023, where I had little to no issues, right? I had maybe one 911 call this year, or someone said, hey, can you come tomorrow? Look, my greens are really bad. Or I have one. Usually I have about 10 or 12 a year. So even as we saw less dead turf in 2023, golfer meetings and communication with members has skyrocketed for me. And I'm not sure if that's just expectations or members, but even stupid comments like, Steve, how do you think our rough is? I'm like, well, rough's great. I think it's too low. I had one guy say, I never heard that one before ever. I said, why do you think it's too low? He goes, oh, I'm a 2 handicap and I chip in off the greens and I win my match every Sunday. And he went on and on and on. And then the superintendent sent me a picture of the scoreboard for the club championship. He shot 101, right? So maybe he's not really a +2. Maybe he give himself all 6-foot putts or 12-foot putts. I don't know. But realize that National Golf Foundation has actually picked up on this. They had an article about 2 years ago, which I just actually read. Nearly half of core golfers, that means they do 8 or more rounds annually, indicated that they've had a notably bad customer service experience at the golf course. So maybe that's lack of staff. Maybe that's pro shop staff. Maybe that's just at the golf course. But I want to leave you with this thought. As many of you know this, but you have no control over them, right? And as I look more and more at grass and my career, there's a lot you don't have control over. People might not show up for work. But these comments you really have no control over. So keep controlling what you have control over and trying to hang in there. And you're always going to have comments about the golf course, whether that's weather related or other topics. So with that, thanks Landscape Supply for the invite. I think it's right at 2:00. Best wishes to you all for a great autumn and winter season. There's my contact. If you want to reach out at any point with a text or email, feel free to do so. So thanks, Eric.
Awesome, man. Great presentation. I appreciate your time. I have a couple of notes that I wrote down. At the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the bunkers and the bunker renovations, and Have you seen increase use of what I'll call the Aussie method, or have you seen that helping with washouts in terms of labor and playability, taken widespread across the industry?
Yes, so I get that question quite a bit about raking bunkers and sand grooming. One of the downsides, I should be careful here. There's two downsides of more Aussie style rakings. One is actually three. I'll give them real quick. One is people perceive when they don't see the furrowed bunker liners that, oh, Eric's guys aren't raking bunkers, right? So the communication has to go out that you are doing that on purpose, right? I've seen many clubs where they start to do the Aussie style on the faces and the slopes, and then they furrow the bottoms, and someone's ball is in the bunker, and they say, why didn't you rake the bunkers today? They were raked, but they maybe weren't raked the way they were 2 or 3 years ago that you expect. Number two is that the algae and some of the stuff that forms when you compact the sand, and those can be a talking point that many people have to go back in and eventually once a week or every 2 weeks actually put some oxygen into that sand. And number three, the downside of the Aussie method, which is some of our newer sands, and I'm not going to pick on any sand, you actually can get a crust. And what will happen is below that crust is soft, and then this is actually tight, and a golf ball will almost create like a volcanic line. I have plenty of photos of the volcanoes. So yes, I am seeing more clubs with the Aussie method. It definitely helps. I would encourage you to try that. But just like everything else, there's some pros and some cons to that raking method for sure.
Awesome. And if anybody on the call today has any, again, you can use the chat function, type in or raise your hand and I'll unmute you. The other comment I had was an observation that we've noted in some of my travels with customers is addition of quicksilver or carfentrazone helping with some additional herbicide applications, whether it was a nutsedge application or a claim on greens, because it's the one herbicide that seems to be applied that's labeled for greens, seeming to help increase efficacy. Is that something that you see or could understand why that would happen?
Yeah, so carfentrazone is a very wide, broad spectrum activity on a lot of materials. It actually does have good activity on sedges, right? It's in the product Dismiss NXT. Basically, it took sulfentrazone, mixed carfentrazone. We see better control of sedges relative to the same pound-to-pound sulfentrazone rate. So, yes, carfentrazone does have activity on a bunch of other weeds, as well as the way it has activity in the photosystem that it actually can increase spectrum of control as well as speed of control.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, I saw a couple interesting observations where guys were spraying a claim on greens and used it with quicksilver and got good kill on a 4-ounce rate of a claim. So awesome. Any other questions from the crowd? Well, Steve, I know we're going to run cross paths over the next couple of weeks and months, but safe travels to you.
Yep.
Thank you again for all that you do for our industry. You're a great friend to not only us, but the entire turf industry. So thanks for what you're doing out there.
Awesome. Thanks for the invite, Eric, and safe travels, and we'll see everybody around. Take care.
All right. Sounds good.